morning, everybody. Welcome to the Leading with Care workshop at Westside. We're really excited to refresh people's memories, learn some new things, and it is just perfect timing that we're reopening so many of our ministries after a 2-year hiatus. So we thought this would be a great time to bring this information back to everyone's mind. We have Dave Phillips here from the Presbyterian Church in Canada, who is also a longtime friend of Westside Church, and he's prepared a presentation to make sure we understand what we're talking about, and he's here to answer any kind of questions and just get some discussion going about how it will apply to Westside. So I will turn it over to Dave now.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, on the map you see 2 arrows. The arrow pointing down is this church, and the arrow pointing up is where I used to live. So we watched this church being, this particular building being built. So I was, if this doesn't go well today, it's your fault. Because I was raised in St. Andrew's Church here. So no, seriously, it was a wonderful place to be raised and to join the Presbyterian Church at I think I was 13 or 14 a few years ago. But now I live in a more famous town, which I think everybody has heard about this week, and that is Uxbridge. We were devastated. Almost a week ago, I think it was 20 after 1. And if you haven't seen what Uxbridge looks like now, go on any news and you'll see it. It's a mess. It really is a mess. We have people in our town that are going out and they're breaking down in tears because of the devastation that probably lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And it went through. The United Church probably is done. The roof has come off it. The interesting thing, what happens with a tornado is, I was talking to the custodian of the United Church, and when he went in, when they could finally get in, 3 interesting things. Parts of a pool, a full barbecue, and a full bicycle were all in their sanctuary. So that shows how high this tornado took things and then just deposited them. On our front, and then I'll get on to Leading with Care, which probably is a little better. Our house, we lost 3 trees, and we lost our furniture that was on the deck. There was a little fence between our house and the neighbor. That's gone. And the back fence we put in June of 2021 is also gone. So it was really, and we were on the edge, so we weren't as bad as some people. So some people have lost where they're living, and the real sad part about this is some of them were on fixed incomes paying $1,000 a month. That's all gone. Those apartments are gone, and probably most of Southern Ontario, but our area, the price of housing is crazy. And we just don't know how we can help the people who have been devastated, some losing all their contents. So the drive over was so nice to see no trees down and houses standing. But I'd ask that you, in your prayers and thoughts, think about our town and also the people in the United Church, because it really is something to see, that building. But anyways, on to Leading with Care. Now, so far, the remote is working. If it doesn't, then we'll have to do it by hand. So anyways, here we go, maybe. Well, the remote was working. Oh, there we go. Well, maybe this is enough. I don't know, but okay. So this is what we want to look at this morning. And please, and you'll see at the end here, questions. I have a fairly good idea of what's probably needed in most of our churches as we do leading with care. But if something comes up you're not sure about, please ask. There'll be parts that I think you'll see. One is the police records check. That comes down the road a bit, mainly because it's probably one of the more controversial parts, and it's getting more controversial what the police are saying. Insurance we'll do fairly quickly. Some things I will skip over because I've got to consider time, but also I do like to start with what is leading with care. And if you've been through a workshop before, it's pretty well the same. We are looking at changing some parts, but nothing drastic, because we like what we've got. And we are, and I say this because I had nothing to do with the design or the writing of Leading with Care, but we are recognized as having one of the better safety policies in the churches. So it's a good policy. The people that worked on it did a great job in putting it together. So let's hope we can go through this. So first of all, just some opening thoughts, maybe. Okay. So we have had questions, why do we need this policy? And I'm going to look at this a couple times, but it's good for us as a church to have a safety policy. And it does relate to legal and insurance matters, but it isn't the reason why we have it. It's there because it should be there. And for us to think that all our churches are perfectly safe is a fallacy, unfortunately. And I'll be straight up. My church, we did have a major problem. And as a result of that, the minister was removed. The church split in some way, in that some people felt we were too hard and some people felt we're too easy with the minister. But the Presbyterian Church in Canada has a policy on sexual abuse, sexual harassment. It never was a criminal one, so we could handle it. And I can't go into a lot of it, but it was public that this actually did happen. Leading with Care is a team working together. So everybody works together. And as some of you are talking first thing, it does apply to all parts of your church. And you'll see that in a couple moments when we talk about vulnerable. It's not a threatening policy. We're not trying to threaten anybody. We're trying to have everybody work together, including the remote. Okay, I think we might have to do it by hand. Okay. It's not difficult to implement, and if we need some ideas, we can talk about that at the end. But if you've got it implemented, great. And it's a policy for all our workplaces. And that means not only in the church, and we use the term workplace fairly loosely, but it also applies to many other things, which we'll also see in a few moments. So really it relates not just to the church building, to what the church is doing outside of its building as well. Okay. That's perfect. So, being a church, we have a biblical background for leading with care. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. The neighbor can be anyone that comes into this building. In our case, we have the food bank for Uxbridge. So the person that walks in for the first time is under the whole umbrella of leading with care. The person, and we had a gentleman in our congregation well into his 90s. He was never in another church except initially Chalmers Presbyterian Church and then St. Andrews Chalmers. He was under exactly the same policy as the person that walks in for the first time. So I really like that as a good model for leading with care. We're looking after our neighbors. It's a policy for ensuring a climate of safety in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. That's what it's all about. And these you'll find in the binder or online. The one thing I do not do is to go through page by page of the 64 pages in the binder. I was a teacher for 34 years. I hated those PA days when someone would stand up and read. So what you're seeing is a condense, but also an expansion of leading with care. Why? Well, there's two key words on here, and that is to ensure and to assure. Children, youth, and vulnerable adults are precious, want to ensure, and then we also want to assure parents and guardians that there's safety in our programs. That you'll find on page 6 of the Leading with Care policy. And that's a very important part of what we want to do. The word vulnerable we'll come to in a moment. So there's another key word here that people have been skipping over, and that's the word in the second line called all. So it's a policy of the Presbyterian Church in Canada that all persons, but in particular children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and then you'll see what I just said, that participate in our program, use our facilities, or even when our program extends outside of the walls of the church. And we want to be sure, Christian compassion, and be safe. So the word safe comes up over and over, but that really is the key to what we want to do. There's two foci on leading with care, safety and prevention, and then the training of and support of teachers and leaders. So the second one is what we're really talking about this morning, the training and support of you as leaders in your congregations. And hopefully when you're done, you can go and whatever part of the church you're associated with, you can then tell others what really leading with care is about. For a long time, we were not serious about abuse prevention. We thought, well, church, big deal. Nothing ever happens in a church. I was in the school system. That was a safe place. Don't worry about it. I happen to be chairman of our library board in Uxbridge. And, people come into the library are nice people. But what we found is that's not true. Most people are. The vast majority of people are. But it's the one or two that causes problems. So each of those now, the school system, our library, the church has safety protocols in place to make sure that it really is a safe place. Okay, so is there any questions so far? That is what Leading with Care is all about. And now what we'll do is we'll start to go into the practicalities of what Leading with Care is all about. Is there any questions? All right. Okay, next please. So, I wrote this out the other day. I want to take a minute to comment on what you may or not be thinking. And this is a question that comes up quite often. Putting all these protocols in place, including the police checks, which, as I say, I will come to, does this start to take our volunteer base down? In other words, I'm not going through all that. It's not worth the hassle. Well, the answer is very simple. As you'll see on the next slide, no. We have found that it does not have a negative effect on volunteers. And there's some reasons. One, it's common for most activities where we are to have safety policies. That is general across our society now. There are safety policies in place. So why is the church any different? A second point, parents in particular, but others as well, want to know the safety protocol and that it is thorough and in place. And by that I mean that we are asked, what's the safety policy there? Do you have something in your church? And it makes a big difference, especially for parents, to know that their children are coming into a safe place. Now, we've got to be honest. We can't guarantee 100%, but we try our best. And where there's been some problems, and we have had problems, and I'll get calls from a church, this happened, someone has not followed the policy. And we have had, in one church in particular, we had a person phoning and causing some real problems in the church. They didn't understand what the policy was all about. So protocol in place works really well. Next one, please. If we implement this properly, safety policies, no worry. But you have to carry them out. And sometimes we've been in churches, and I travel from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island. And it's about time, I think, maybe someone else has started to learn how to do these workshops. I started on this 18 years ago with a one-year contract. Well, you see what happens with one-year contracts. They keep... I was never a free agent, so I couldn't say, well, you know, I should get a lot more because, but. So now what I want to look at is real life scenarios. I've switched them around a bit, but there are some here that I use every time, and the first one is one of them. Because we don't think about fires, but in churches there has been fires. And what happens if, now this is a lot better than it used to be because you had a lot of wood in here. And the overall building is pretty good because of it's cement. But you go into some of our churches, they are full of wood. And we had a couple churches in our area, north of us, Beaverton area. Cannington Church burnt down. So that they built a new church and brought together some of the churches in that area. But fire can be a disaster, but once again, put things in place. So here it is. Children are in Sunday school, whether they are or not, doesn't matter. Congregation worship. What happens if tomorrow morning a fire starts here? Or any church? What happens? Just talk for a minute so you can get relax for a second, get talking. Just what would happen in your church tomorrow morning if a fire started? We go to the next slide, I think, too.
Everybody run for the front door.
Oh, sorry. Yes, tomorrow morning, Sunday, whatever day it is. Okay. Can you put that? Yeah. Okay, we're going to do this fairly quickly. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, what would happen tomorrow morning? Panic.
Parents are going to run downstairs to get their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Others are going to try to get out that door.
Okay.
We have never, ever had a fire drill.
Okay. Just so you're free and easy to say what you want, that's not unusual.
I didn't think of
No. What would happen?
Well, the fire department's going to get called at some point.
Okay.
Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, by everybody. Okay. But what about getting people out?
orderly fashion.
Yes.
As a Sunday school teacher, I would bring the children out to the closest exit.
Yes.
Somebody has to take control.
Okay. Take them out the closest exit, and then what? Okay. You do have a meeting place?
On the fire map, there should be one.
Okay. Okay. Any comments to add to that about fire?
Well, we should have a meeting place outside, so it would either be at the upper parking lot, or depending on what's happening in the building, might be down in the lower parking lot. Two parking lots.
Okay. Anything to add?
I would like the board in the session to have a meeting and discuss what to do if such a thing happens,
Okay.
so that you're prepared.
Okay, good. As I say, this is not unusual. Okay? It doesn't mean it's right, but yes.
So we're assuming someone has gone downstairs to tell Sunday school and nursery that there is a fire out here.
Yes.
And check the bathrooms.
Yes.
Is there not something, not that it's helpful at this point, but isn't there something in the office, like there's some process or policy that says fire exits and like what, a map and everything? I think there is, because I believe I was involved in something, but there's something in the office, but that doesn't help us now.
Map the door right here.
Yeah.
There are 8 fire extinguishers in the building.
Okay.
There are fire sensors in the roof of this room, but unfortunately, they're turned off because the alarm system is off.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let's look at what we can do. All right, because and my own church is the same. You know, I said we got to have a fire drill. We got to have a fire drill. Well, we'll do it next time. Anyhow, couple things. One, a key point is who is designated to go and tell the Sunday school. Number 2, who is designated to phone the fire department to be sure they know. All right. Number 3, and this one drives people crazy, and I've been challenged on this one, so I'm prepared for it. Wherever you take the adults, so if you have the meeting place there, you have the children in a different place. They don't come together. The reason for that is you should have an attendance at Sunday school. And when you get everybody outside, you do that attendance again. If they start having the adults and the children getting into a car, then all of a sudden, Johnny or Janie is missing. So it's much simpler just to go to different places. Then when everything's settled, bring them together. Another point, and someone brought up, check the washrooms. Check all areas, and I don't think I brought it. But I was thankful to one of the hotels I was staying in. They had one of those little hooks you put on the door, you know, I'm still sleeping, or make up the room. You just get some of those and put them on doors so that whoever's doing your last check, and it's usually fairly easy in the church. I had that job in a school of almost 2,000 kids. I think they wanted to get rid of me one way or another. So you go and check that everybody's out as the fire's burning. But as you're going around, so if this is a classroom, you check, everybody's out, and then put it in the door jamb. And initially we said, you know, to hook it over the door, but if you put it in the door jamb and somebody goes back in, then you know. But just have 1 or 2 people go around so that you don't have, one person does all the checking, and then it's very clear as you look around, whatever church you're in, you can see, oh, it's all clear. And then you're okay.
At the hospital in Cambridge, we had a little flippy thing at the top of the door, and once you had checked it, you flipped it over so that everybody knew as they walked down the hall that those rooms had been checked.
Okay.
Simple and cheap.
Yeah. And the second word's important, cheap. I was looking at this morning and thought, this has got to be Presbyterian Church. Nobody's taken the front. So, And I must admit, I used to sit up in the back, as a couple of people might remember that was a good place to sit, especially during exam time, because the hymn book was a great place to put your notes that you were studying in and make it look like you were really... Okay, so with the fire then, just a fire drill shows you a lot of things, and I mean it. A few years ago, we did a fire drill, and the mistake we made is where that we were keen to have the adults and the children separated. The problem was, and probably most of you haven't been to Uxbridge, but our church sits here, and the highway is where the cement is. So we had the children were going that way to the busiest part, whereas the other side is a one-way street that's hardly used. That's what a fire drill will do for you, is to show you whether it's going to work or not. So it's up to you what you do next, but I would really sit down, and it doesn't take long just to think about how do people get out of your building, and you've got enough exits, so it's not going to be that difficult. Some of the older churches we have, boy oh boy, they could be real fire traps. Okay, next. So we're committed to 4 things. First, prevent the abuse of children, youth, and vulnerable adults. Secondly, protect the vulnerable in our midst. And the next slide, I think, is vulnerable. Report incidents of abuse, neglect, and harm. And then to train and support our teachers and leaders. Now, if I can just comment very briefly on the third one, to report incidents of abuse, neglect, and harm. That comes from the government, provincial legislation. And that can be through children and family services or whatever you have in your area. So if you suspect that a child has come in and has been abused in one way or another, it's up to you to report that to the local authorities. The police, you can, but we tend to try to get it to an agency that deals strictly with that. And we have had, again, those reports. The insurance company, when we were doing some work, said most reports are pretty accurate. Very seldom do you get somebody phoning in and saying, well, this happened and it really didn't. So just keep that on reporting. In Ontario, I believe it's under the age of 16, you must report it. It varies from province to province. The second one, the vulnerable. Now, before we look, well, that's okay, put that up. Thank you. The vulnerable. This is our definition of vulnerable that we find in Leading with Care. But I'm gonna ask you a simple question and see if you can figure this one out. It gives you the, great, that's perfect, thank you. It gives you a definition of what vulnerable is. What is it? What does the definition mean to you? If you were asked one question, which I'm now going to ask you, who is vulnerable? Who are the vulnerable people? Anyone? Elderly, certainly. Children.
Pretty much anybody that puts trust in somebody and that trust fails.
Okay? Disabled. Okay? Yeah. Right on. Vulnerable could be anybody. Now, we do know some people, as you gave definitions of what vulnerable is, certainly, but it can be anybody. And most of the cases that we have had, and I can use my own church again, no idea that the 2 people involved were vulnerable. What we can pick out physical vulnerability, someone's been playing baseball or softball or soccer or ballet, whatever, and they break their leg, and you can see that. You can see that there's a vulnerable person that needs help to get around. But you cannot see the emotional or psychological vulnerabilities. And that's where we ran into problems within the particular incident in our church. So that is why we really stress that assume everybody's vulnerable, not to the extent that you go overboard, but to remember that somebody in your congregation could be facing some trauma, trauma, whatever. And the psychological part is the one that really is where we get into abuse problems in the church, in society generally. Okay? Any questions? No one? Okay. The last part on vulnerability is the respect for elders in particular, and I don't mean session members, although they should have respect. Probably a lot of respect, but anyways. My dad was an elder in this church, and I'm an elder in my church, so that's why I just threw that little bit in there. But please remember that the people you're dealing with, and someone has mentioned about people that are older, that respect what they have, and sometimes as we get older, we start to forget things, and our life becomes a little bit more muddled than normal. So respect's very important. Elder abuse is just something that we should never, ever have to face, as well as abuse at other. But sometimes elders are abused. We see it within the financial field quite often, where somebody will phone up and say, we have this great thing going, would you donate $100? And that to me is abuse. So don't let that happen in your church. Okay, moving on. Okay, this next one, again, comes up under leading with care and is found in the section 4 in the appendix. And that is safety. As far as what happens if someone hurts themselves. What do you do? Where is your first aid kit? What is in it? Who checks it? So quickly, just so you can have a time to chat for a couple minutes, think of two scenarios. One, that an adult hurts himself, and it could be anything. So I'm not being very too specific, but there's something here that I want you to know, because it came up in one of the churches with an adult. And then what about a child? So quick, just what are you going to do? How do you handle it? Talk about first aid kits.
Just gonna get the microphone.
You guys, oops.
No, none of the above. But just so that we can capture people's comments on YouTube, either if they want to speak into it or I can just repeat.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. We'll start it that way and go the other way.
Can I pull it more? Oh. Do you want me to test? Good.
Okay, we comments, and we have a microphone. So, three things. One, what happens when an adult gets hurt, what happens if a child gets hurt, and where's the first aid kits? We'll start over there. Excuse me.
Ideas, comments?
Well, you should, under basic first aid, you should ask if you can help them. And then first aid kits, I believe there's a small one in the kitchen, and there might be one in the office. I'm guessing right now, but.
I didn't know either of them.
Okay, we'll go to this back here. Can you reach that far?
That's all right, I can shout, I've had kids. I think it's very different between an adult and a child, for one thing. An adult gives you permission to help them on the spot. If my child falls and has a bump on her head, I would want the people attending my child to get in touch with me.
Okay.
Because I don't know what the extenuating circumstances could be in that child. So it's very hard to treat an unknown
Mm-hmm.
issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the way it could be different between children and adults, is whether you're getting consent from the person who is hurt in the case of an adult, or trying to find their parent or guardian for consent if it's a kid.
Conceivably, Sunday school, the parents are here, conceivably. The other child deal that we have in the church is girl guides, brownies, and that. And the parents by default have given control to the leaders of that path. Is that true?
Yeah, that's a good point about other groups that use the church, brownies, Girl Guides, and where the parents wouldn't be around, but they put their trust in the leaders from the guides groups.
Yeah. Good. We'll talk about outside groups too. Anything to add? Okay.
I was just thinking, depending on in a scenario of a cut, if it's something that could just be fixed with a Band-Aid, that's control within the environment. But if it requires stitches, depending on that,
Yep.
you have to call the ambulance and get medical attention too.
Right. Yeah, the severity is a key. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We did a CPR course prior to the pandemic when we put the defibrillator in.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that needs periodically to be updated because you never know whether somebody who attended is actually in the building at the time something happens.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have a defibrillator on site, but many people are trained on how to use it, but maybe not everyone. And as the groups using the church change and new people join, it would be great to have more people who know how to use the defibrillator.
Yeah. And do you have any comments? No.
My wife is sitting in the pew and the old fellow beside her keeled over. We were fortunate to have a number of nurses in the congregation that attended to him, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just a pretty exciting time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bert's reminding us that this really has happened in real life.
Yeah. Exciting is an interesting comment. But for some reason, my dad, I attended this church, and then, of course, it was down the street. But when he came to the church in Uxbridge, he could faint. And we never did figure that one out. We did air quality and all that. But, yeah, time and place is important. Did you have a hand?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We were saying that if we had an ERT booth, people that we know have first aid are qualified, and they would be the first people we would get a hold of if it happened in the congregation.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody that does have first aid, so if something happens, you know, they're the go-to people.
Yeah, good point. We have that in church office in Toronto, where there's two groups of people that are, one first aid and then one with more serious. Yeah. Yes?
No one has mentioned the expiry date on the first aid kit. When was the last time someone looked into it?
Okay.
I think that's part of the board's issue.
Okay. So whoever's looking after things, take notes. Okay. Yeah.
Also, I think we say there's one in the kitchen. I think we all know there's one in the kitchen, but we think there's one in the office, but we're not sure.
Okay.
And it needs to be accessible. I think if there's like an immediate emergency, there should be one here in the church upstairs.
There's one at the back of the sanctuary too, I believe.
I just wanted to repeat those points for YouTube. that to make sure we know where the first aid kits are and that they're kept up to date and inspected regularly would be really important things for us to keep in mind and to have someone designated so that we know that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. The first aid kits, even in, I was a head of phys ed in my school in Whitby, and I had 2 people designated, a male and a female, for more severe injuries. Cuts, we could all handle. But if it was more severe, maybe needing an ambulance or something, there's 2 designated people that we'd go to. And it wasn't me. So be sure to have designated people. Some churches have them sign in that Sunday that they're going to be there. Again, how do you handle that? Well, don't make it too complicated or you won't have anybody do it. The child, yeah, I think you've hit the nail right in the head, that generally speaking, with a child, you probably have someone in the congregation, either a parent or guardian. All right? If not, then it's up to you to make sure they're looked after, if you can't get a hold of parents or guardians. The adult, going back to the child, I remember we took our daughter to the hospital many years ago. When she was done, the doctor, Dr. Lennox it was, put a Band-Aid on her arm. And I said, what's wrong? She said, nothing is wrong with her. But she feels better because she has a Band-Aid. And I've seen that in school and churches too. Put a Band-Aid on. If there's nothing serious, they feel better. The adult definitely is different because with all due respect to my friendly people of the same gender as I am, we have a tendency to say everything's okay. Males will say, don't worry, everything's fine. Females not maybe quite as much. They're more sensible than we are sometimes. But what I want to get at is the follow-up. That if someone is injured in your church, the minimum you should do is to phone that home after. With an adult, if somebody can go and drop in and see if they're okay. And the example I'll give very briefly is we know of a church, a person fell and it was okay. It was actually a female. Everything's fine, don't worry. Well, nobody really followed up for quite a while, and when they did, they phoned and they couldn't get an answer from her. And she ended up in the hospital. Nothing really serious, but enough that she had to have some care and casts and whatnot. That's kind of downplaying how serious. But it wasn't life-threatening. But a follow-up immediately, they might have got onto it a little sooner. You've already mentioned the first aid kit. Where is it? I've probably been in or related to 500 to 600 Presbyterian churches. And this is honest truth. Only one of all those, when I said, where is the first aid kit, they didn't answer the kitchen. Every church has a first aid kit in the kitchen, which they should have. But what we also found is, where is it in the kitchen? So we suggest now, like that red cross that's on your screen there, just put that on the door where the first aid kit is. You don't have to make super duper first aid kits. Even in our school where as I said, we're up to 2,000 kids. I had a friend of mine who was a pharmacist. He made up some small first aid kits because we had 4 gyms and a weight room and a couple other classrooms. So the small kits could be spread out through the school, but we had one major kit as well. A lot of first aid kits that are sold as a package have a lot of things you don't need. Really, you don't. You're not going to be doing people with broken arms, broken legs, or that. But get get the important things in your first aid kit. And then as suggested, check it regularly and make sure. The other thing was suggested, I want to move on. I'll use this. So if this is the first aid kit and you put the stuff in it, put a little seal on the opening. So what the seal will do, when that is broken, you know someone has been in it. And when I've asked churches about first, it's one thing that seems not to be tampered with. There seems to be a respect for first aid kits. So the seal, it's broken, something has been taken out. Whoever's checking can check it quickly. Okay, any questions on that? Now, yes.
What happens if, like an adult, even children, have underlying health conditions and something happens? It's a privacy issue.
Mm-hmm.
They will say in a lot of cases that not everyone needs to know my business. Like, what if they have asthma or they need an inhaler? Like, before I retired, people couldn't have their inhaler out on the floor. So the crewing room, which there's always somebody there, kept their inhalers. But if they need it right away, like, how do you know if you don't know they need one?
Yeah.
Something happens to them.
Yeah, and that's, I sound like a politician now in Ontario. That's a very good question, which basically means it gives you a few seconds to think about the answer. But it is, because you're right. A lot of the forms we get, and we had the same in school, they wouldn't put some information on it. And I guess my feeling is basically there's not a heck of a lot we can do if they won't give us the information we need. Camps have faced the same thing. Inhalers and that generally, though, they could carry in the church. Yeah, I think they can carry those.
Nice if a friend or someone else in the church knew they had an underlying condition, that if something happened or they passed out or they had a real low blood sugar,
Yeah.
it could possibly be the culprit.
And the other problem is, and then I'll take a question or a comment, the forms generally that they do fill out then are kept in a locked space, which we suggest, so yeah, it's a very difficult one. It's something that you as a church should think about. What are you going to do? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that most, if not all, first aid kits I've encountered in the workplace, there's a sign of, like a form, like where you put down what, even if it's just a Band-Aid, the date, time, the reason, and what you
Yeah.
did with that first aid kit. The log, like a log,
Yeah, good point. Excellent, yeah. So when you follow all the things you want to do with the first aid kit, then yeah, put something like a log in there. A paper log, because right now around my town we got more logs that you can shake a stick at. But fill it in, and there's a little play on words there too. I wasn't an English teacher. But yeah, the first aid kit is a key. You might not use it, but if you have to use it, make sure it's in good shape, and then also that you have the ability to put your name and then the information about that. Okay, let's move on to the next. And I think really now we're getting into the issues that we face when we get into the whole area of abuse. And this has to do with a Sunday school situation. First of all, I use the name Chris because someone told me once it could be a male or female, and I said that's exactly the reason I use the name Chris. Because it doesn't matter whether Chris is a male or a female Sunday school teacher. But Chris is a really hard-working teacher. And I know this has come up, but Chris teaches in a room all by himself or herself. In this case, and this again happened in a particular church, that the teacher was by themselves. And I'll give you even a worse scenario in a minute, another true story. And again, very quickly as we go around, just to chat, what's the problem here? What suggestions would you make? because it applies more than just the Sunday school. You know, it could apply, and we'll see this in a moment, to your church camps, any of these activities that we have. So it could be the same scenario, but in a different setting. So what are we going to do for the situation with Chris? So just go around. We'll go around the room quickly, and I'll give you about 2 minutes. Like the football game, we got the 2-minute warning. Sorry, did you have a question? Maybe not. Well, okay, that's what you got to bring up when you, yeah. No. Yeah, I saw that.
Somebody's going by, see somebody being hurt, but, I mean, we don't check around all the time. But if there's somebody looking at it and says, this boy is giving a hard time, so having a window that somebody can come in and, now you can hear the children laughing and crying, come down here.
Yeah.
So when you say, God, I do that,
But what if, wait a minute. Whoops. Okay, let's go, let's start in the middle. What are you going to do for Chris? Leave the door open. Have windows installed. Okay? I saw that, thank goodness, yeah. Yeah, okay? All right?
Have more than one individual, obviously, like an assistant, if possible.
Okay. All right.
Put the nursery and Sunday school together for the day if there's not enough people.
Good. Yep. Yeah.
Have a system where you can contact the parents upstairs with a number or a pager that they can come down
Yeah.
and help with.
Yeah. In case I forget, it was in one church, and it looked like a restaurant. And they had a whole bunch of numbers, and they took, everyone had a particular number. So number 35, you better get downstairs.
Red, green, or yellow.
Yeah, well, that's right. Okay, yes. Yes, go ahead.
I work with a youth group, and under no circumstances whatsoever can we be alone with the kids. So there has to be two, and if there's male and female, usually one leader has to be female and one has to be male. And you can never be alone with them.
Perfect, thank you. Here? And-
Pretty well everything's been said that we discussed.
Okay, good. Anything to add? The point you made was a really good point, that, and too often we talk about protecting the kids or the vulnerable, we forget about protecting our leaders. And that was the point you made, which is a really good point. We've got to remember to protect Chris, and Chris is in a difficult position. He should never be put in that position. So let's go back. The windows, I saw downstairs, and it's really neat what you've done with windows. So that's very important. Doors open's important, but you must have people in there. And we suggest at least 2 non-related adults. And if you want to have youth leaders, that's fine, that's great. But still, 2 non-related adults should be there at all times. If you can't, then I picked this up from a church, and I forget what we are calling it, but they called shepherds. They had shepherds. And if you don't have enough teachers, then that particular Sunday, then you have another adult or 2 or whatever you need, and they become like auxiliary teachers. And they can go into the classroom just so you have more adults. Now, if you're really stuck, which I hope you're not, that one shepherd can actually cover a couple rooms if there's windows. Where we ran into problems in our church was the shepherd, who was a great guy, don't get me wrong, but he went into one of the classrooms, and then he was covering a couple of, because we have big windows in our doors, he could do that. But he got so engaged in the class that he became part of it, which was good for the kids to see that, you know, one of our church elders was interested, but wasn't good for the other room where he was also checking into things. I'll tell you the story about one I had mentioned. And this happened on a Saturday morning, and I won't go where. But the teacher said to me, Dave, I got a situation. When they say that, you know something's coming up here. And her classroom was on the other side of the furnace room. And I said, wait a minute now, how do you get to it? And she said, I go through the furnace room to my classroom. What is your exit back through the furnace room? And I said to her, I said, my suggestion, and you can blame me if you want, you do not take that class there tomorrow, because this was a Saturday. I said, you are putting the kids in jeopardy. You're really putting yourself in jeopardy, because she was the only teacher as well. And you know, one, it was very positive in the sense that they had run out of space for their Sunday school. So they had lots of kids. But there's got to be a better way than that, than doing that. So I think you get the picture that lots of supervision, 2 non-related adults at least. They're having the windows, and that really helped. And I was in one of our new churches, and they actually, when they built the new church, part of the wall already was a window. So they had a regular door and then a big window beside it. And that, at that time, if you had to, you could use curtains for it, you know, to darken it. But it was really neat. And my understanding, they're doing that in schools, some schools now too, which really makes it much easier for teachers. Excuse me. I'll come to police records check shortly.
We're in that exact same situation right now, is that we have one male Sunday school teacher and having a terrible time trying to recruit any others. And the same thing with the nursery. We were lucky to get one person a week that will volunteer. So do we just cancel until we can get more volunteers?
Okay, I'll tell you what we did. It's called blackmail, I think. Generally, because I look after Christian education in our church, when this comes up, so one Sunday I'll go up and I'll say, we're passing the clipboard around for shepherds. We still have the teachers, but for shepherds. And we would like each Sunday for someone to sign up. You don't have to sign up for all of them. I mean, if you want to miss the sermon that badly, well, there's other things you can do. But we'll put it, the clipboard's going to go around, and please, you know, realize that people are speaking. Now, here's the thing. If we don't have enough teachers signed on this clipboard, the kids will be in Sunday school next Sunday. So it's up to you. Do you want the kids in, which is great to have, don't get me wrong, or do you want them in Sunday school? So if you don't sign up, be patient next week, because the kids are all going to be here. Boy, did they sign up fast. In one church, a minister was telling me, the minister said, well, so-and-so's sick and so-and-so's, and this happened actually, it wasn't in a Presbyterian church. And the minister said, now it's time for Sunday school, but I understand that, that Mary and Peter are sick, we don't have enough teachers. So a couple of you go out with the one teacher they did have, wasn't us, and help out. So we have enough adults. Nobody stood up. So this is true, minister took his book and he went, I'm teaching, you will do the rest of the service. A friend of mine told me that was at that church, said they never had a problem again. So you have to do things, I guess, I don't know. Any question on adults being, remember, we're protecting ourselves as well as the children. Okay, let's move to the next.
I think just one little issue on that. I think most churches are what I call white hairs, and I can say that because I am. When we were kids, a lot of this stuff was not required.
Yes.
Or needed. I guess that's the same word. Or law, or legal.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we ask for assistance, maybe we don't explain why it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think, in general, we don't think about it, unless you were in the school system or a nurse or something like that. Because, if you were not putting anybody down, a housewife for your whole life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you never heard about trouble with one person in a classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's a good point.
I think explaining reason makes
Yeah.
the necessity to.
I was in one church, no, let's say a couple years ago, but we have had a couple years, nothing happened. And we actually did a dialogue instead of the sermon. The minister and I did a dialogue on leading with care so that people understood just what you were saying. Yeah, there is a lot of people that just don't. Has anybody ever been to Stanley, New Brunswick? It's, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, yeah. And I was doing a workshop there, and the minister said, you go down this road, and I was in Fredericton. He said, just go down this road and keep going. So I was going down that road, and I kept going. I thought, this is crazy. I mean, I live in Uxbridge, and I thought it was at the end of the world, but this was worse. So there's a person standing on the side of the road, I think in the rural area, and I said to the gentleman, I'm going to Stanley, New Brunswick. And he said, just stay on this road and keep going. But the point I want to make is when I got there and we were doing this, one of the gentlemen there said, Dave, you're from Toronto, which I'm not. But I said, you're from Toronto? And I said, yes, I'm from the Toronto area. This never happens here. You're talking about things in big cities. And there was a lady there, and I gave her a lot of credit. She stood up and addressed the gentleman. I forget his name, but whatever it was, he might have, said, Paul, we've had abuse here. So even a small town had abuse. So it can happen. It can happen anywhere. And again, once again, there was quiet. So yes. So the explanation is important to understand. I think younger people, for the most part, just say, that's it. We know because it's happening everywhere we go. If we join a sports team, we know that there's a safety protocol, or ballet or arts, whatever it might be. So yeah, point well taken.
I think it's more than expected today. Like as far as in our new plans for the building, we're going to have the nursery on the same level as the sanctuary, simply because the mindset of the newer, younger generation is that we don't want kids set away down into the basement. We want to be able to access them very quickly. That's my perception of what the discussion has been around our plans.
Good. I heard a little bit about that because there was some chat with the Presbyterian Church Building Corporation. I happen to be chairman of that board. So you'd probably have an easy road in, although I would declare a conflict of interest, certainly. But what we have up on the board now is risk factors. And it's not very clear because of my slide, but you'll find it in the binder on page 21. And it really gives you a good overview of where's the risk. And when you look at it, it says teacher leader may be alone with persons served. What we're just talking about. Yes, this is true. The first thing we want you to do is to get it out of that column and put it over into no. If you don't, then we get into the whole area of police checks. Please have a close look at that. Your committee or whoever is going to carry on with the leading with care to see where are the risk factors here. Because there are some here, I'm sure. But you have to look very closely. And there's one that's going to come up, and that's number 6. The ministry job description includes touching persons served. And I'll talk about that one because that is the hardest one as we revamped leading with care to figure out what do we really want to say. We know what we mean, but how do we say it? About touching. You know, because you get into the situation of someone in the nursery, well, you know, they got to touch. You have a situation where you get into an injury, they got to be, or someone, you know, some little guy or little girl comes up and grabs you by the leg. All those things we have to address because they're important. And I'm going to come to that shortly. Okay, next, please. Okay. So this is where we get into the touching bit of business. And basically, this is with older people, but we can take with younger people as well. And we move on. At the tea table, you hold hands in prayer. When Missy talks of something sad in her life, you lean over and put your arm around her shoulder. When you drop her off at home, you give her a quick hug. See, all that goes against what we're saying in number 6. So I think there's another screen on that too. I hope. Yes. And that's exactly the word. Good. Yeah, good. Was that inappropriate, what happened? No. What is examples of inappropriate touch? Because this is where we get into the abuse parts. Unwanted. Okay, unwanted, right. Yep. And unnecessary. Unnecessary? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess you could even talk about danger areas.
Yep. Yep. And where is it occurring? I mean, in the sense of the building. I was doing a workshop, and it was in a situation like this, actually. And as I walked in the door, and a number of people knew me, they said, we better hug each other now because Dave's here. We'll never be able to do it again. That was true. You see, but that's not right. I mean, you got a lot of people in here, so abuse is probably not going to occur because you got other people around. In a one-on-one situation in a closed area, it's inappropriate. No matter what, no matter how hard you're trying to not do something inappropriate, you're in a situation where nobody else can see what's going on. And then stories can start, and we don't want that. So just be careful that one as we try to figure out what we're going to do with that particular number 6 on page 21. Because we are a church, we want to show love to each other, but we also know that can be where abuse takes place. Excuse me. All right? So think about that. Okay.
Just along that same line,
Sure.
I want to take a look at the definition the World Health Organization uses for elder abuse. It's a huge definition, about 5 lines long, half a paragraph. But there's 3 words in there that we pick out when we're presenting, talk about lack of trust.
Yeah.
So I think inappropriate is, a lot of it is, if I don't trust you,
Mhm.
then it's inappropriate.
Right. Yeah, and also there is the point of the receiver of the touch. You know, if I come up to you and just give you a big hug, but you might not want it. So what are what are you feeling about it is extremely important. You know, and we have people that for the best reasons want to give someone a hug, but the person that's receiving it doesn't know that those best reasons are, and particularly if they've been through some form of abuse. Okay? Police records checks. Oh, we had to get to that eventually. The police records checks are, oh, thank you. Keep it coming. Long time to supper. Yes.
I think there was just questions about hugs and when it is appropriate or not then to hug. Is it just that you hold your arms out and ask, could I give you a hug? Or is it you have to know the person well? Or how does one determine if it's only in a group setting you can hug? I don't know, is there like a guideline we should give? Well, I just heard some talking amongst the group of how do you know if the person wants to hug you or not? You just rely on them to give you the cue?
Okay, one, I'm not sure how many are familiar with Evangel Hall. It's an outreach program the Presbyterian Church has in downtown Toronto. And I've done some work with them. What they have done there is say, no touching, period. It is. But in that setting, you have a lot of people that have had abuse. So they said, we couldn't get guidelines that fit, so they said none. There's nothing wrong with saying to a person, boy, I'd like to give you a hug, is that okay? And if they say no, that's the end of it. If they say yes, then you can go ahead with it. But I think that's the easiest. It's not easy in this sense, but it's the easiest way to do it. Just ask. Secondly, body language will tell you. And if you're walking up to someone and you can tell by their eyes or their facial expression that this is something they don't want, then no. But on the other hand, if you walk up to someone and you say, can I give you a hug, and they open their arms, okay, that's fine. The other thing to watch is, especially men, maybe that's being too gender specific, is how hard is the hug? We had a gentleman in our church, great, and again, a great guy, but he was in the building trades. So he was a strong man. And his hugs, it wasn't people didn't want the hug, it was they didn't want his. Because he was really strong. Really strong. And, you know, you almost could lose weight getting a hug from him because you just squeeze it. But, you know, but he was doing it for the right reason, but the wrong way. Was there another part of that question?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Okay.
We used to be a really huggy church until the pandemic, and that took care of that.
Mm-hmm.
When you had that scenario up about what's appropriate and inappropriate in the medical community, we call that therapeutic touch. You're trying to show empathy.
Yeah, it's as I say, we're really having trouble with that because we don't want to come down so harsh as a church to say no, but on the other hand, we realize that with people that have faced abuse, the last thing they want is a hug. And I guess, with the pandemic, it helped in the sense that people did stay apart. But
It's a very difficult thing for those of us who have been nursing for a long time, where touch was very important, but the modern generation doesn't appreciate, and now you almost have to ask permission before you can touch anybody. It's really difficult.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, you had the right slide. I screwed it up. So police records checks. Oh, boy. This is probably the most difficult part of leading with care. And, you know, we know a couple things. The police records check or vulnerable sector check, whatever you want to call it, is only good up until the time that it's done. People know how to get around it and all those things. But as we've worked through the police checks, we found that in our insurance companies and with the lawyer, that seems to be the only thing we have right now, is the police checks. What we stress is, in a lot of cases, you don't even need them. Because if we're trying our best, and I mean carrying out leading with care, having lots of adults around when there's kids or when there's groups occurring, then you've cut the risk factor down already. Generally, the police checks go to ministers, should be ministers, session members, probably Sunday school teachers. One church wasn't Presbyterian in Manitoba because somebody in the Presbyterian church said, do we have to do this? Everybody in the congregation had to have a police check. Everybody. And that's just a little bit too much. Right now, we suggest it's a vulnerable sector check. A couple of us did a workshop on police checks, and by the time we were done, to be honest, we were really confused because they were saying to go to second level checks, not vulnerable sector. We went to the police said no, do vulnerable sector. So we really suggest to do the vulnerable sector check. Before you ask who pays for it, that's up to the church. In some churches, the church pays for them. In other churches, people themselves pay for it. Some places they're done on the spot. Other places take a few months.
We've discussed that it will be reimbursed. So if you have yours, you can submit it for reimbursement.
I'm going to get mine done here then. And it has to be done by your local authority. All right, so wherever you live, for my case, it's the Durham Police, even though I work in Toronto.
Is there an age limit on it?
No. There was something about minors, but I checked with the Metro Toronto Police, and they said if you want a police check on a minor, go ahead and do it. You're not going to probably find very much. So.
We found
Yeah.
we found that under 18 couldn't get a vulnerable sector check here in Cambridge.
Okay.
But
Yeah, in Toronto.
it might vary on
Yeah.
cities.
Oh, they do. Yeah. That's the other thing. The police, the actual check is consistent across the country, but where it's done, how much it costs, and how long it takes. Like, I did one workshop just as we were not coming out of the pandemic, because we haven't. And in that one, it was OPP in the Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, and then up through Aurelia area. And the particular detachment they're dealing with was free as a volunteer. There's a difference between a volunteer and a paid position, too. So my suggestion on the police checks, vulnerable sector, is if you're not sure, get it done. We have had some things show up on them that the church did not know, but other times the church already knows. The bigger question is, what happens if on the vulnerable sector check, it comes back and that person has a record? How do you deal with that? Now, I'll tell you, one area in across the country has said, the insurance company said, if you have any record, you cannot volunteer. I think that's really harsh. But what do you do if the vulnerable sector check shows you've had a record? Okay, so you've done it. Somebody's come in and hands you the thing and says, well, they might not. If they're hesitant to hand it in, then there's probably something there. Yes?
So when we have vulnerable sector checks done, I understood from the police that it was
Oh.
Unless, of course, there were seniors' money taken.
Okay, yeah, I had not heard that. I just thought it was a blanket check.
I don't think it's your entire criminal record, it's just,
Yeah, there's two different types, I believe, that are available. Like you can order a full record that
Yes.
whether or not you have ever been in trouble with the law, or there's something called a vulnerable sector check, which typically is less expensive and is more often required because
Right.
a lot of places aren't interested whether you got, charged with theft under 5,000 25 years ago. What they want to know is, are you violent? Are you dangerous? Are you
so it
right?
only discusses whether you beat up kids and things
Yeah.
like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, let's go with, yes.
So the policy stipulates you're never alone anyway, so,
Okay,
okay.
that's,
And is it an accusation, or is it, I guess if it's on your record, it would be a charge.
yeah, yeah,
So you're never alone with anyone, so.
But
Okay.
with us, even though you're never allowed to be alone with a kid, you still have to have the vulnerable sector check.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so, okay, so there's one thing to consider if someone, has had a record related to what they're doing. Are they surrounded by other adults? Are they working with other adults? Okay, what's another thing to consider in that? Because I'm dead against just saying, you've had a record, that's it. I don't think that's what churches should do.
How much time has passed?
Exactly. How much, was this like 2 weeks ago? 2 months ago, or 30 years ago, or whatever? So, yeah, exactly. Is this something that was a one-off and never occurred again? That's a second consideration. The third consideration is what's on that record, how does it relate to what they want to do in the church? Is it consistent with what they want to do as a leader or whatever? If it's child abuse or something, then you got to be a little more careful, even if you do have a couple of other adults around. But don't automatically, as this area was saying to our churches, they can't take part. Look, once again, you look carefully at what have they been involved in, or what do they want to be involved in. And sometimes, this is what they need, to get involved with the church and try to work through things. I know of 8 churches where it's either showing up or that the people have admitted to, and that has to do with the whole thing of child abuse on a consistent basis. And that was a tough one to deal with. One of our churches has done a wonderful job in this gentleman wanted to be involved in church worship, nothing else. And they set up a stages of what could happen. And it was 2 or 3 years before they could come to church. Just before church started, they left right after church. Then it became they could associate us with the coffee time after, but not with children. And I think 2 elders and the minister knew. And they monitored them carefully, but not in the sense that they were like helicopter friends. They weren't over top, but they watched it. And my understanding is that has worked quite well, but they were very, very careful on how they handled it. Another church, a friend of mine was telling me, was not a Presbyterian church, thank goodness, but a friend went to this church who was out west, and the minister got up one Sunday morning and pointed the guy out and said, this person has abused children. What? Like, you just got to wonder. But anyways, we won't get into that. But let's hope that number one, we don't face abuse, and then secondly, that if we do, we handle it properly. So insurance, this I'll just go through very quickly. Please make sure you're insured. And again, someone on the board or whatever would look after your insurance. But there's just some points in there to be sure that you look after. the broker insurance company, but the key is who is covered in your policy, in particular when you get into outside groups. Have they got their own insurance plus your insurance, or don't they? Because if they don't have their own insurance, I'd be a little bit hesitant on what happens down the road if something does go wrong. Most groups now have their own insurance plus the church's insurance, which is probably a liability of some form. Okay, now next please. The outside groups, what we did in one church was we went in and we gave them lots of time to be sure that everyone knew. And we said, I went in with leading with care, and then one other person from the church talked about that particular church. But what we did is we told everybody, I think it was about 4 months in advance, that if you're an outside group, you must have a representative at this meeting. And so they did. We had a good and we said we'd be 1 hour. That's it, no more than an hour. And we did that as well. But what happened there was very interesting, and I brought it with me. When we were done, we had the church's policy on safety leading with care, but they had a number of questions. For example, where are the first aid kits? Where are the telephones? Can we use the telephone? Is it restricted strictly to local calls? What about lights? What about keys for doors? So we had another list that we put together, or that church put together, to answer their questions, but then we could use it for all outside groups. So we had 2 pages, one of safety and one of really practicalities in using the church. And that helped greatly with the outside groups that used that church. They were given this information, it was reviewed, and then they could come in and use the building. Keys is a little more difficult, but I don't want to get into keys because most times we end up with churches with so many keys that they're not sure at times. Okay, that's all I want to do on outside groups. I really want to get on to something else. That's all. That's just what I explained, I think. Lockdowns. Again, we had a lockdown in one of our schools. Boy, if you've ever been in a lockdown, it's not fun, because we did have one in my school, and it lasted a couple hours, and then we found out what happened. It was interesting. But if you get into a lockdown, do you have a protocol in place for how to handle it? If somebody is threatening from the outside, do you know what to do? And if not, you should really look into it, because it's once again a thing you think is not ever going to happen, but it can. A person can show up and then is threatening. So there's just some things there about what you can do. What can you do? And a couple things that are very, very important is where windows are, to not have people around windows, and also that the building is secure, but you also make sure you contact the authorities as soon as possible. I mean, it's coming out now about what happened in Texas, that it might have been up to an hour before anyone reacted. And I mean, that's just a sad situation all over. So think about lockdowns as you think about fire or anything else. When I go out west, we also have to think about earthquakes, which is, almost the difference to fire, getting people out. How do you keep safe? That's something I hope we don't have to worry about right now. Okay, next. All right, so this relates to leading with care, and we've added more and more on this in the whole issue of harassment and bullying. It's unfortunately a topic that has gained a lot of importance over the last few years. It might have always been there, but now we do have a policy within the Presbyterian Church in Canada on the whole issue of harassment. We lump it, or I lump it together with bullying, because bullying is part of harassment. Please, if you see it, do something about it. And there's going to be a couple slides here I'll talk about briefly. So if we just flip to the next one, please. Number one, the policy that we now have in the Presbyterian Church of Canada, it's not tolerated. We do not put up with harassment. It's physical or verbal behavior, and quite often it can be that verbal behavior against a member, volunteer, church employee in the church that's unwelcome. You see it. And I'll give you an example in a minute. It can be, and usually is, threatening. Okay? Next. So with bullies. So this is an example, and we actually did a whole couple hours on bullying a few years ago now at Central Church in downtown Guelph, or Cambridge or whatever, on harassment. And I just got a call the other day that there's a group in want one in fall to talk all about harassment. But here's one in a church, and I'll tell you why this one's the only one I use as an example when we're doing Leading with Care. It's the example of a person that says, or a family that says, if you don't do it, we're out of here. Now, the bullying is in the sense of saying, you better do what I'm telling you to do, or else we're gone. When we did this workshop in one of the presbyteries, I used 4 different examples of what I saw as bullying. Another one is where, and this happened again, at the end of the service, a member came up and just bullied the music director, harassed her, because the music wasn't very good, and what is the matter with you? Well, I was a guest there, and we were still in the church. And but this one seemed to have the biggest effect on the group of people that were in that church, where someone would say, do it my way or else. If that comes your way, the or else is really important, because you cannot be bullied or harassed into a situation that you don't want to be in. But overall, just watch harassment, because and we're talking only about bullying and harassment with adults, not with kids. Okay, so there are some positives. And we'll flip through these. Okay, that's okay. The one thing that was there is, what is the greater good, the congregation or that individual? You got to think. So what is bullying or harassment? It's an imbalance of power. Somebody thinks they have more power over somebody else. It's something that's repeated. It's not a one-off generally. It's intentional. It just doesn't happen. It's something intentional. It can be physical, and that's the worst, where someone actually touches someone. It's generally verbal. It can be social in the sense you exclude people. We're going to have something at the church, but we don't want her to come. That is social harassment. You're really doing something to her. But the verbal is the worst, okay? So, and these are all from a group called Future Learn. It's online. It's basically online schooling, but it's universities all over the world. So what do you want to do? One is listen, and this comes up in our harassment too. Listen to what's happened. Number 2, then reflect on what's happened. Don't just all of a sudden jump in. 3 is to empathize. There's something wrong with the guy that's the bully, or the girl that's the bully. as well as the people being bullying. Never interrogate somebody. And then I really like this one. How would you like me to help? Both the bully, how can we help you? Because there's something there that's causing him or her to be the bully. But also, how do we help the person that's being bullied? How do we help that guy who takes it out on the music director on that Sunday? There's something wrong there. But the poor person that had it, had received it, now they did help that lady because a number of people saw it. So, I mean, the whole thing on harassment and bullying, something I wish we never had to talk about, but it's there. And I see it so often, unfortunately. Okay. So, the strategies. This is and I'm going fairly quickly because I want to leave time for questions. So now we're into strategies. What are we going to do with all this stuff? So, you can form a leading with care, and you might have already done this, I'm not sure. But leading with care committee. The session, that's the worst group. With all due respect. Why do I say the session? And I see this happening in my own session, so I'm not blaming anybody except ours. We have on the docket for the day the report from the Leading with Care Committee, usually at the bottom of the list. But in the past month since the last session meeting, we've had an issue with one of the families in the church. They've gone through a lot of problems, and how do we help them out, and can we find housing, and all those things. So what happens? That takes a lot of time, which it should. We've run out of time. Let's put the Leading with Care Committee on the next meeting. Well, in the next meeting, because our session, we don't have a board of managers. We have a finance committee and that. But at the next meeting, we come up and we found that in the month of April, the givings dropped drastically. And why did it drop? How are we going to handle it? And how do we make up the difference? And that's a big discussion. And the Leading with Care Committee will put off to the next meeting. That's why the session. A standing committee, again, it could be a committee you already have. It could be in one church, they have the committee of committees. That one blew me away a bit, but anyways, yeah, I said, well, where would it end up in your church? It would end up in the committee of committees. And I did not pursue that because I thought, oh man, this is Presbyterianism at its best. Or the best one is to form a new committee, and this I picked up from a church in West Toronto. This is what they did, and went really quickly. They have 5 people on the committee, and it could be any 5, but in this case, is a representative of the board or the maintenance committee, from Christian education, from pastoral or visitation, from the session and the congregation. So each one of them was responsible to their own group. So for example, the Christian Education Committee comes to the meeting of the 5 and they say, and you don't, so it's okay. All the Sunday school rooms have solid doors, solid wall, nothing. What can we do about that? So then the board person can go back to his committee and say, the Christian Education Committee has a real concern here that we need to really have a good look at putting windows in the doors. You don't discuss that with those 5 people. You go back to your own committee. So that works. The visitation committee could come in and someone says, we're having trouble with getting visitors. Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so really needs a visit. That person can then go back to his or her committee, and they work it out and take it back. This church that I'm talking about started from 0, and within 4 months, they had a full Leading with Care committee in place, and they had full Leading with Care protocol in place. But it was simple because they didn't involve a whole bunch of people who would be discussing things that really aren't important. They just got to really what the issues were at that church. And I really liked it. I really liked the way they did it. Okay, yes. Just time, okay. So there's a lot there, and I'm sorry I went through it fairly quickly, but I want to give you an overview. But what questions do you have? And please feel free to ask any questions related to leading with care. Don't go out in the parking lot later or wherever and say, I wish I asked that question. So I take anything. If I can't answer it, I'll get back to you.
Why, sir, were you called today to come to this church?
Why was I'm not sure. Yeah, well, I guess so, yeah. I mean, I do leading with care across the country for the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And unfortunately, I think right now I'm the only one that's doing it nationally. So we should be, I should be working with somebody else. So that's why I was asked to come. Does that make it better or worse? Okay, yeah. And it was really a great opportunity for me to come back here. Because I say, this is where I grew up. I lived over there. And I haven't been here. I hate to say, but I think the last time I was here was my mom's funeral. Might have been here sometimes after, but yeah, it's a very important part of my life, this church, that's for sure. Okay? Yes?
It seems to me that as one man, you have a very big job. Why do you not have a team? In this church here, we have an outreach program called Elder Abuse Awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been on it now for about 10 years. And we're always looking for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and relieve us and help us. Now, COVID has scrapped that for the last 2 or 3 years. But my question to you is, why are you alone?
Oh, okay. I'm only alone when I go out. Because in the church office, we do have a group. And then across the country, now again, things change. We used to have workers in every synod that the WMS sponsored. We still have 2 here in this synod. So they also will do the work. But quite often, because I've done it so long, they probably are afraid to say it's time to leave. I'm not sure. My contract does come up at the end of June, so I'll see what they say. I think the other thing is I like doing it, and it seems they're quite happy if I do it. When I get sick of doing it, then they'll know. I mean, I'll tell them straight up that, you know. But yeah, I don't want to say that there isn't a team. I'm sort of the front of that group. And as I say, I work with people in ministry and church vocations in the national office and the Life and Mission Agency, so we do talk about various issues. But
Do you find it's hard to get people to volunteer on a long-term basis now?
yes.
It's right across the country.
Yeah, it's a short term, some will, there are some long terms, but generally it's people that will go for a specific task and then they move on. And also, you know, I know we talk about churches declining, but our population is old. You know, we look, in Uxbridge, the number in the kids in school is dropping. And that's, young families can't afford to live there, but I think it's the 50 to 65-year-olds is going up. And for us especially in Uxbridge, they're commuters. And they don't have anything really there to hold them, so yeah, but yeah, yes?
Who within the church receives the results of the vulnerable police check? So for privacy.
Okay, it depends on how you want to handle it. In particular our church, I'll give you an example. the church administrator and I handle it. Only us two. But you can decide. It's not generally good to have the minister because he or she could be, well, like you have the situation here. They could move on. Plus, it entangles them a bit that they really don't need to be. It could be two session members, male and a female generally. Our church administrator is female, and I think I'm male, so I'm okay. We can have the two genders. But some churches do have the minister and clerk of session.
So you would make the decision if something came back that was a little questionable, the two of you would decide whether, how to handle it?
We would get the information, then if there's something there that we think important, it goes to session, but nowhere else. And if your session respects confidentiality, which it should, then that's where it stays. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sandra?
How long does the police check?
Oh.
Like, how long is it good for?
Right now, 5 years. But we're getting pressure from insurance companies to lessen that to 2 or 3. I'm not sure things change all that much, but now we're saying 5. Mm-hmm. Other questions? That's right. Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. If it's on, and I think a lot depends on your church and the town you're in. If the church is small and people, ooh, you know what happened? Or in a small town like we are, I mean, we're getting bigger. I think we're 21,000, but that's the whole township. When we had an incident with our minister, the whole town knew about it. But and it's not something that should be funny, but I'd walk out, I was clerk of session, you walk uptown, and since we lived there for quite a while, I said, hey, Dave, we know what happened to your church. I said, oh, what happened? Well, then I'd hear stories. Man alive, we had some of the best things happening in our church you could imagine. It wasn't true. And I could say that. I couldn't go into details, but I said, that's not what happened at all. But boy, there's some great stories. Shouldn't laugh. Mm-hmm.
Well, everybody needs to make it a little better than the person that told it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's make it a little better.
Regarding the police check, is that a question that should be put to the insurance company?
Yes. Yeah. Your insurance company is important to make sure what you're doing. I mean, normal tasks of a church, no. But when you get into the whole police checks, yeah, I think it's wise just to check with the insurance broker, whoever he or she might be. Yeah, yeah. We have a really good relationship with our insurance company. The broker's great, and it's not a big company, not like Marsh or Ecclesiastical. Yep. Anything else?
How many people are in your congregation?
There's about, I think it's around 90 some odd. That doesn't mean it's hard to attendance now because we're sort of partly online and partly live. But I think generally when we were before the pandemic, maybe 50 to 60. Mm-hmm. It's a good base. I mean, it was it's a real community, but not anymore. It's a commuter community with a lot of trees down and houses broken. Yeah. Anyone else? Any questions?
I just have a comment. The last time I took the Leading with Care was like probably 20 or so years ago, and like you probably know this church amalgamated, but the church I came from, these part Sunday school and nursery, again, we were required to take it like 20 years ago, I don't know how long, at least that minimum, and to be refreshed with it today, I think was really good, so thank
Okay.
you, whoever set it up for,
Good.
it needs to be refreshed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Closer than 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. Some churches do it fairly regular, and I go fairly regular. I loved to go to Montreal. Well, a couple reasons. One, their hockey team, which didn't do very well this year, so don't tell me. But the other, quite often it's been in around December, which is cold in Montreal, but it's beautiful. And sometimes we've been there when they have the big concert that CBC does, and they tape it in St. Andrews and St. Paul's Church. And the music and that's great, but I've been to pretty well everywhere across the country, and it's a very different country. If I had a choice, I'd be living in Nova Scotia, because it's the friendliest place going. If you're not called dear in the first 30 seconds, you will be in the next 30, because...
Until all the Ontarians move out there.
Yeah, I know, and that's...
Oh wait, that already happened.
Yeah, it's okay that my sister-in-law benefited from that, so somebody wanted to buy her place. Yes?
Just to show my ignorance here, you mentioned a book a number of times through your presentation. Is that a handout, or is that something you go to the website to get, or buy it, or sell it, or?
Okay, it's on the website. You can get it from church office. I usually bring one with me, but I didn't. It's 64 pages of very intense reading. The first 3 chapters outline what it is. Yeah, so it is the policy. As I say, we're changing it a bit. Once again, with General Assembly not meeting in person, we're not sure how much we can get on the floor of General Assembly to make changes. So yeah, it is. Leading with Care policy is online, but we also do have it in paper form at church office. And if you want some sent, just my email is dphillips, Phillips, @presbyterian.ca. And sometimes I'm there, and sometimes, but my phone messages always come through to me. My email always comes through to me. I haven't been in a bit, but I've been called cleaning up the mess. Anyways. Okay, I'm certainly willing to take any questions, or if there's something else, you can send me an email. But just to thank the people that invited me to come. As I say, it was really, when I got the idea of coming to, and I still call it gulp, I asked for forgiveness, but to come here, I was really, really pleased to come and to be with you people, to be back in the sanctuary, which is very different the last time but also I got here early, and to walk around a bit, and I guess I was surprised a little bit about the downtown, but anyways, that happens in a lot of communities, so thank you.
Yes, thank you for an excellent presentation. It was really helpful. And thank you to everyone who came. That was excellent. We had more people than we expected, and with registration, that was good to see more faces. So currently, Tara and I have been working on it. We had sort of had the idea in about, I think, January of 2020, and we were looking to start the committee, and then it got a little bit held off. So we started looking into how we could learn about it as a congregation, and what we need to implement next, and how we need to grow the Leading with Care committee.